Hey guys, so if you are now watching this video or listening to it, you and a partner should have spent some time discussing both why this example here that's listed is poor and why this other example here is what I would consider a strong example of quote analysis and explanation. So let's go back to the poor example. So some of the things that I hope that you noticed with a partner, and if you didn't write this down in your note sheet, please make sure to actually do that. It's really important to have accurate notes. So I couldn't be there today, so I really wanted you guys to know what I was trying to say. So one of the first things that people notice when they read this is that it's really redundant. Like it talks about separating here, then the quote has separating, and then they're separating in the explanation. That repetition seems really silly when you're reading it. Like anybody thinks this is pretty obviously not good, but I see a lot of this in student writing. I think part of it is either not knowing how to set up a quote, not knowing how to explain it, and sometimes the quote itself is actually not worthy of analysis. It's not actually really good. So aside from noting repetition, which you should definitely write in this part of the box if you didn't already, other people might notice that the setup to the quote is not very detailed. It actually doesn't establish plot or the context at all. So please add that if you didn't on your notes. Other people really think like starting an explanation with "this shows" is not the best way. It sounds a little bit elementary. And part of the reason is that this is a pronoun. So please circle that on your handout. This actually stands for something. So if I tell you what exactly in the evidence shows that he didn't separate his kids, you have to actually point to something in specific. Like, how did you get to that analysis? Some students will say, well, it's the quote that shows it. I'll just tell you that quotes show nothing about how the inner working of your mind actually works. You're the one who has to explain how you developed certain inferences. So this is a pronoun. You always have to define what the pronoun means. Otherwise, it doesn't really make much sense to anybody who's not you in your own brain. So you want to make it transparent for your reader. The only piece of analysis that actually exists in this example is this idea of love them equally. That's a good inference. Like you read this piece of evidence, so your impression is that, well, Hunter really loves the kids equally. There is no sense in this explanation, but how the reader got to that particular analysis, right? So this is really nice, but you have no way of showing like what in the quote actually made the writer think this way. All right, so make sure you have those notes in the little box over here. There are several reasons why this is not the best example. Now note that I think the strong example is a strong example, and part of it's hypocritical because I like wrote it, right? So like I would think that this is like college level, like really, really deep analysis because I wrote it. So I'm not going to necessarily hold you guys to the same extreme standard, but I think from this example, I'm hoping that you and your partner noted several things here. So let's kind of begin. The first thing you should hopefully have noticed is that the setup to the quote, there's two quotes in here, and one of the quotes is kind of used as setup, even though I analyze it. But this part right here that I have highlighted on the screen is a really detailed setup. It takes you like step by step in terms of plot and how we lead to what Hunter says is like his first thing that he says to her, which is enough for a baseball team. You'll also notice that the weaving here is really nice, which has nothing to do with analysis, but you know, it's just perfectly woven into your work here, both this quote and then the quote back here. Other things that people notice is that there are clear explanations for how inferences are made. So here's an example. If my evidence is enough for a baseball team, I actually have to address what words in this particular quote make this inference like an inference about something. So like I thought that him saying, wow, you have enough kids for a baseball team, I thought it was really positive. So I said that it was positive terms because you wouldn't actually use the word team unless you think it's useful or fun in some way. So that's how I jumped to the conclusion that, well, him saying that it's enough for a baseball team, I thought was positive. I then built that idea that he used this positive terminology to, signal his approval. So like that to me meant that he approves of her and her kids. Note that I do never say this quote shows. I define this. So when we jump down to this quote, unlike the one above, because that's the one I analyzed above as well, you'll notice here that I say, well, the fact that Hunter never separates his biological children from Ruth's first 8 children, that's actually what the this refers to in the first quote. It's the idea that he doesn't actually separate them. The fact that he doesn't separate them then leads the reader to make certain inferences. So you as the writer have to be very clear about how you're leading to the different inferences. Something else that people notice about this example is that I actually use parts of the quote to support my inferences. For example, like up here, I basically restate the quote because those are really important words for me, the word baseball and team and enough kids. And then I explain why those words are important. Down here, for the second quote, I actually have here, I talk about the word separation, which is in the quote, and then I talk about the word half brothers and sisters. So you have to break down the quotes in certain ways to make them really, really interesting for your reader. Like, I just want to know how you've developed your inferences. That's what makes it really high level. Something else you'll notice is that I talk about significance. So I'm not just summarizing things, I'm making judgments and inferences. And then at the end, that's really the main point of my analysis is that, well, that piece of evidence really emphasizes that James and Ruth have a really strong family unit with these kids. So make sure that you build to some sort of significance. Most people will notice that it flows really well. There's no redundancy except the beginnings of sentences. Like here is, I talk about positive terminology here, then I say, well, his use of positive terminology, and then I build to a new point. Then I talk about the word deterred, and then I build to that. Well, his lack of deterrence. So it's like there's a certain flow and a connection for each of the sentences that makes something really, really high level. I'm not going to expect that you master this now, but I want you to get experience with these models so we can keep practicing, and hopefully by the end of the year you guys will be able to see how to do that. You'll be so far ahead of the game if you're planning on going to college or even next year really to survive class in a really successful way with writing. You'll also notice that I underline certain verbs like signals, hints, demonstrates, represents, emphasizing. Those are strong verbs that are better than shows. Shows is a blah word. You want to build your vocabulary a little bit. So if you go to the second page of the document, you'll notice that I provided for you some active verbs for writing about texts. Try using some of these. Look some of them up if you've never heard them. See if you can incorporate them into your work. So use them as references. And then other students would always note that there's a pretty high level of vocabulary like deterred, deterrence, so, using some better words is important. If you're not really good with vocabulary, it's not the end of the world. We're actually going to start some vocab in a very not crazy way starting next week, I believe. So, just kind of know that we're going to be working on adding more words to our arsenals. But in general, I hope that you and your partner notice those things. And if you didn't, make sure you're writing them down on the side so you kind of have an idea of what I'm expecting. At this point, the subs should tell you, Ms. Stickles, Schultz Stickles, should tell you what you're going to do, which is I would like for you to use this strong example as a model for how to practice analyzing quotes. So I'm not going to have you do the 2-quote thing. Like I use quotes sometimes to set up quotes. This is really high in advance. Like I don't expect you to be able to do that unless you feel personally comfortable doing that. But I do want you guys to focus, definitely on this bottom half, which has a setup of a quote. I've woven the quote into my writing, and then look at my explanation and elaboration. It's so much larger than the quote itself, which is really what you're aiming for. Like if your quote is about 3 lines, then your text should be, your own writing and inferencing should be about 3 lines per line itself. So happy practicing, and please follow directions. I hope this was helpful. Please take really good notes, and thank you for your patience. I know it's sucky to learn something new when your teacher isn't there, but I hope this is helpful, and I want to see your practices soon. Thanks, guys.